My proposal is this. After having read a bit of the history of Vatican II, of course, the role played by John the 23rd, the preparatory stages, the conciliar discussions and debates, the time of Pope Paul VI. And then you go to the documents that had been promulgated and the various forms of appropriation or reception, whether official reception or the liturgical, canonical, curial reception, the various regional receptions of the council, and the hidden, unheralded receptions happening in the homes, happening in parishes. After looking at all of those, I propose that the letter and spirit of Vatican II could be viewed and investigated from the perspective of its being a pastoral council. What does it mean to be pastoral? What does it mean for a council to generate a church that desires to be pastoral? For it would be an anomaly if a council is called pastoral and the church that emerges from it is not pastoral. But what does that mean, to be pastoral? I see a lot of students here. I've been a teacher myself for a number of years now, and I continue teaching theology when I have time. When you ask difficult questions, some students will say, "Your Eminence, I don't think I need to study that. I intend to be a pastoral priest in the future." That will not please the Admiral. But really, what does it mean to be pastoral? What does the council mean when its spirit is permeated by that vision and desire? The search, no matter how tentative, to be a pastoral council, I think is crucial. For it is at the heart of the desire of the council to unleash faith and missionary zeal in the contemporary world. I admit this is not the only prism that could be used to determine the spirit animating the letter and the event of Vatican II. But it could be useful in appreciating and even critically evaluating the documents and the renewal that the Council has effected so far. How did Vatican II envision a pastorally responsive church? How did this pastoral vision of Vatican II surface in the debates and in the documents? What types of pastoral church have emerged since Vatican II, and in fact claiming to have imbibed the spirit of Vatican II? If you are in a diocese with 1,000 priests, I'm sure you will have 1,000 understandings of pastoral. But let us try. Is that okay? Now let me go to the main body of my sharing. The various areas of being pastoral. This is far from exhaustive. I did not have time to really go to the archives and to consult Professor Lamberic on this. But to talk about being pastoral is to touch on relationships. In fact, if we move for a while from the council and go to an individual who calls himself a pastor, pastoral is not the characteristic so much of an activity. Pastoral is what you are and what you become. And no matter how many activities you do or engage in, those activities may not be at all pastoral in nature, in inspiration, and in spirit. Relationships matter. The church's relationships with various interlocutors or dimensions of the faith and ecclesial life would, I think, help us understand the pastoral spirit of Vatican II. First, the relationship of the council of the church to revelation, or to what was loosely called doctrine, or sometimes deposit of faith. We don't have time to delineate all of these terms, but let us, just for the purposes of this conference, to just take them under one umbrella: divine truth, revelation, doctrine, the deposit of faith. When the council talks about divine truth in revelation, it is careful not to treat divine truth as in a conceptual or notional manner. And this is very clear in the verbum number 2. When the council talks about divine revelation and the truth that it contains, it goes back to God. God chose to reveal God's self and to make known to us God's purpose. Revelation is a speech. It's a speech of love coming from a God who dialogues, a God who speaks, but a God who listens, and a God who knows the potential hearers. It is a speech of love, inviting the hearers to intimate communion. Because it is God, God's will, and God's invitation to a living relationship with us, the so-called sacred deposit of faith is to be safeguarded and taught in a more efficacious way, according to St. John the 23rd. It is not the preservation of an idea, of a concept. It is saving truth that is at stake here. And as saving truth, it must touch the various areas of human activity, of human life. It must touch the family. It must touch society. It must touch the deepest recesses of the human person. Because of the saving thrust of revelation, the divine truth must address the present situation of human beings in their new situations and in their new ways of living. It is in this context, truth that is alive, because it is God who speaks. It is God who makes God's self known. It is because of this that Pope John the 23rd, in his famous opening speech at the council, says, we are safeguarding this truth, but not as a precious treasure of antiquity. That is not the approach to divine truth. He says the council should not just repeat details that we already know. The council should not repeat details the theologians and past councils had already said. We're not talking about details. We're talking about God who reaches out to God's people. I think I'm giving a retreat here. We're still in Vatican II, huh? The forgotten document. So, being pastoral, if we just pause here, no? Being pastoral is serving the God who reveals God's self. Being pastoral is serving the God who speaks a saving, loving word to the human soul. Being pastoral is allowing God's word to be the soul of the church's missionary and pastoral activity. That's very clear in Dei Verbum. Being pastoral is trusting in the power and the beauty of God's word. Being pastoral is humbly facilitating people's access to God's word. Now, a critical question. Verbum Domini, which we can consider as one reception of the spirit and text of Vatican II, says that the biblical apostolate should not be one apostolate alongside the other apostolates in the diocese or the parish, but must animate all the apostolate. Is that happening? Or has the church forgotten Dei Verbum? Another critical question. Pope John the 23rd said, one thing is the deposit of faith, the truth contained in the doctrine, and another thing is the mode or manner with which it is proclaimed. Now, can you change the mode and manner without touching the core? I see some saying, now discuss that this coming days. Yeah. This type of questioning surfaced not in exactly this way, formulated this way during the synod. No? And Bishop Boni is nodding here. Thank you for supporting me. The so-called essentialists. No. Are the essentialists, classicists, quite right in their intuition in opposing new expressions for fear that when you have new expressions, you might be touching or even adulterating the core? This last question that I have somehow led to the compromises used in Vatican II. Professor Herman Pottmeyer, said Vatican II could be considered as a transitional council. Many of the doctrines have been expressed not in a synthetical way, but in a way that allowed persuasions, different persuasions, to stand alongside each other. And he considers it quite positively, looking at the context of Vatican II. Like, for example, you have an expression, hierarchical communion. So the hierarchy is preserved, but then you bring in communion. Now, what exactly is hierarchical communion? They say, it is what it is. Now tell me, what is the spirit and what is the letter there? Hierarchical communion. Now, for many people, they'll say that's a failure of Vatican II. It failed to synthesize concepts. But Professor Pottmeyer says, well, let us be realistic. That was what the council could afford to do at that time. And he said, that's even positive. No position is now absolutized. With another concept beside it, you have an equilibrium of some sort and relativized positions. I think this is also being pastoral, being at ease with gray areas, the humility to allow questions to remain open. Pope Paul VI, in the closing speech of the council, said, December 7, 1965, if some questions remain in need of adequate response, this indicates not la stanchezza, not the tiredness at the closing of the council, but it expresses the vitality that this council has awakened. He believes that this vitality will perdure, and let time experience that vitality. And a time will come when open-ended questions will find their proper response. It's fatal for a pastor to want questions answered immediately, clearly. Being pastoral is not putting a cursor before the face of a parishioner and saying, I give you 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. I delete you. No. Part of being a pastor is, okay, you know that life will go on. In fact, people are asking me, what's happening to your archdiocese now that you're always out? I've been out for 6 years now. 6 months now. I mean, 6 weeks now. See, I'm getting confused. 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks. From the papal visit to the United States, the Synod, now Belgium. I say, well, I think it's running better. Bishop, please don't follow my bad example. But really, I was very, very much amazed reading again the closing speech of Pope Paul VI. It's not procrastination. It is not blind abandon. It is an act of humble faith. The vitality of this council will perdure. Even if in 1965 we don't have clear answers yet. This is the first relationship with the revealed truth, relationship with what we call the deposit of faith. The second is the relationship of the world, of the council, of the church, to the world, to history, or better still, to human beings. When Pope John the 23rd, when Pope Paul VI and the council talks about the world, it is not just the geographic space, but it is the world constructed by human beings. It is the world of human beings. The contemporary world, the modern world, with its contradictions, with its blindness, with its anguish, with its violence, with its pride, with the tremendous suffering of human beings. This world, this history, is the place where the church will embrace humanity. Pope John the 23rd, again, in the opening speech, says there are a lot of prophets of doom. They see only ruin and darkness in the world. And they have a nostalgia for an idealized past, where everything in the past looked better than what we see in the present. And he says, I am not inclined to listen to those prophets of doom. He says, they have not learned from history, which is the great teacher of life. Because of this hopeful, positive view of the world, this broken world remains God's world. God has not abandoned this world. God is there. And because of that, according to Pope John the 23rd, the church prefers to use the medicine of mercy instead of the medicine of severity. In the Italian version, it says, instead of embracing the world with rigorous arms, instead of embracing the world with tender arms, you experience a hug like that from some of the professors. Hi, Admiral. Oh, where am I? I lost my... and it says, we explain the value of the teaching rather than condemning people. So he says, and Pope Paul VI will use this a number of times, show to them, especially those who are confused and in error, show to them the beauty, the attractiveness of the teaching, rather than just condemning them in their error. And especially to those separated from the church. Show the maternal face of the church, patience, kindness, goodness, especially to those facing difficulties. Don't hate the world. It's already wounded. Love it. It is God's word. Paul VI says, the religion, he used the word religion, the religion of our council is principally love. Love. And this cannot be, according to him, and the council cannot be accused of irreligiosity and infidelity to the gospel if its religion is love. The council focuses on the human being of today as he or she is today. For to know God requires knowing the human person. Wow. I could almost hear Les Miserables. To see and to love another person is to see the face of God. Now, the all-familiar lines of Gaudium et Spes, the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the people of our times are those also of the followers of Christ. And the church is not motivated by earthly ambition in the church's approach to the world. No, it is simply to carry out the work of Christ. To be pastoral is to believe that the broken world, broken humanity, is still loved by God. To be pastoral is to convey the beauty and attractiveness of the gospel in the church's loving, merciful embrace of humanity, rather than constantly blaming those who are already confused. To be pastoral is to trust in God and to trust in humanity. The words of Pope Paul VI. Okay. Yeah. May I continue? I'm close to the end. So, the relationship with divine revelation, relationship with the world, and now, the church. The internal relationship of the church, which is reflected in its exterior relationship. What Cardinal Sunan should say, the ad intra and the ad extra. Here, it's simply communion. I read one article that says, the only politics allowed in the church is that of communion. Any canon lawyers here? That's the politics allowed in the church, communion. As our Admiral so beautifully reminded us in Vatican II, the church is not the light of the world. Lumen Gentium is not the church. The church is not the light to the nations. It is Jesus Christ who is the light. And Vatican II reminds the church, hey, wake up. Do not pretend to be the light. The early ecclesiastical writers would even talk about the lunar ministry of the church. The church is the moon, possessing no light of its own, but turning to the sun. But the church must keep its communion with the sun for it to have some brightness, not its own, but refracted to the world from the sun. The church is a humble sign and instrument, like a sacrament, of humanity's intimate relationship with God and the unity within humanity. And more concretely, the unity of different cultures, peoples of different tongues, of different traditions, different histories. For humanity, the church is a universal communion of local communities, showing the world that love unites. It is a communion that recognizes elements of sanctification and truth outside its visible structures. Lumen Gentium, number 8. Paul VI says, this church is in dialogue with community, bearing the voice of pastoral charity. And he says, look at the spirit here. He says, this communion of the church with humanity must be conducted in a style of ordinary conversation. The church must know how to talk. When people say, I think it will rain, the church must be able to say, yes, it will rain. It will not say, eschatologically, no. I stop there. There is a time for that language. But when humanity is before the church, it says, engage in ordinary conversation. Touch lived experience. For when you speak coming from lived experience, you become more persuasive. And there is only one direction in this conversation. It is to serve humanity. The idea of service occupies a central position in the council. So, being pastoral is being a servant of communion within the church, among Christians, and with the whole of humanity. Being pastoral is being a servant. So those are the three levels that I have identified in terms of being pastoral, the council as a pastoral council. And I'm offering them to you to see whether those things are present in all the documents. Because it can happen that in one document you have a mixture of tones, a mixture also of spirits. And I will devote this last 10 minutes or so. Can you still stand another 10 minutes of me here? Here. Going to the present. For I think it is incumbent upon us, we who live with a certain proximity to the council, to continue receiving the council, appropriating the council, rediscovering in changing times and challenges this spirit, which is a legacy to us. I see the young faces here. Unlike us, I did my first Holy Communion before Vatican II. So I had a bit of memory of the church before Vatican II. No, but most of you know only one church, or sociological form of the church, if you want to put it that way. The church already inspired by Vatican II. But it is our mission to continue, discovering, rediscovering this spirit in the letter, being critical, and also imbibing it and hopefully living it. As a transitional council with a lot of compromises, the documents of Vatican II contain different understandings and spirits of being pastoral. And I'm inviting you to look into all of those elements. The period after Vatican II must be characterized by a continuing search for an adequate pastoral identity and spirit in our activities and mission in the world. I want to give you some examples. Paul VI renounced the papal tiara for the poor. The inauguration of the papal ministry then included the coronation of the Pope, the tiara. Paul VI with the influence, they said, of the group of Cardinal and the and companions, the Church of the Poor, decided to renounce the tiara. And then he became the pilgrim pope, going to different parts of the world. And he had these great ecumenical gestures. But then some people say, but we cannot understand why his language in Humane Vitae was like that. The truth that he was proclaiming was prophetic. But some were saying, why was that prophetic message quoted in a language that was quite different from the conversational dialogue that he himself advocated? John Paul II, ut unum sint, wow, inviting the church, help us discover new expressions of the papacy. Earlier, Pope Paul VI even said that the greatest stumbling block to union among Christians is the papacy. And Pope John Paul II says, oh, let us reflect on this. Then the great gathering in Assisi of leaders of various groups, his pleas against war, the only candle burning there, praying that Iraq would not be bombed. But then some people say, how does that blend with the language of Dominus Jesus and the language of Communionis Notio? So we could see that even after the council, there is this search. What does it mean to be pastoral? The synods of bishops. People ask me, how was this recently concluded synod? I said, normale. It's normal. I've been to 6 synods, 5 as a bishop, and the first one as one of the so-called experts. And you could see, I could almost sense the Second Vatican Council in miniature. The diversity of opinions, the diversity of cultural and existential experiences, all leading to this. Sometimes you have this very fiery words and even action. But last year and this year, I was one of the president delegates. How do I keep my cool? How do I keep a sincere, genuine smile on my face all throughout? I just think to myself, these people, even if they differ from each other, they all love Jesus. They all love the church. They all love humanity. They all love the family. And when I think that way, I can smile again. I try to search for the Spirit. And even if the pastoral expression may differ, I try to convince myself they're trying to be pastoral in their own ways. But I hope we could listen to one another and rediscover the spirit of being pastoral as taught to us by Vatican II. In Asia, the triple dialogue. Remember, Pope Paul VI, first encyclical, Ecclesiam Suam, promulgated within the council was on dialogue. And that was picked up by the bishops of Asia. The programmatic dialogue, triple dialogue with cultures, with religions, with the poor. Yeah, but sadly, in many parts of Asia, the dialogue partners don't want to dialogue. How do you keep the spirit? I cannot mention countries, but you know, there are countries where Christians are forbidden from using some words. Some words in the vernacular are reserved for some religious groups. I was talking with one bishop who told me, we just received a notice from the government. 31 words cannot be used now by Christians. How do you dialogue? How do you keep the spirit when you are hated? Pope Francis, his language, his style, saying, "Who am I to judge?" Some people clapped their hands. Some said, "Why does he not speak like the vicar of Christ?" Somebody asked me, "Do you believe in the Antichrist?" I said, "I've heard of the Antichrist, but I don't know if I believe in it." And then I asked the person, "Why are you asking?" He said, "I think Pope Francis is the Antichrist." So what made you say that? He says, "He does not use red shoes." I'm sure this person loves the church, but he loves the church by imposing red shoes. So tomorrow, those who will attend the LEST seminars, please wear something red if you love the church. The social message of the gospel. And if you look at the encyclical Laudato Si, the exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis quotes the statements from various episcopal conferences instead of quoting himself and quoting his homilies and writings. A new way of integrating communion into a papal document. Would a papal reception of Vatican II's pastoral vision ensure a similar reception worldwide? He is interpreting the spirit of Vatican II. But will it translate into a worldwide reception of the same spirit? Let me close by sharing with you. Last Monday, I went to Greece to visit a transit point for the refugees. It was on the border with Macedonia, or what's the official? Fyrom, a former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. I went there for Caritas. I told the Holy Father, as I am not familiar with the diplomatic relationships of the Vatican with Greece and Fyrom, but he says, just go, show them love, caritas, love. And right there, no, we saw groups of refugees. You could smell misery. You could see tiredness. Some had nothing except their clothes and the most precious to them, their families, their children. One teenager looked at me and asked me, "Are you a Muslim?" I said, "No." But then he could not take his eyes off of me. And I wondered what he was thinking of. Was he marveling that this Muslim is giving him food? Was he getting afraid? But I just kept smiling, assuring him that we are here to help. And as he moved, his eyes were fixed on me. But in the midst of that misery, you also see a lot of humanity. I failed to take a photo of this father. Looked very tired, very, very tired. But his daughter wanted to play. And so he allowed the girl, the little girl, to play with his face. No. And the girl was having a grand time. And you could see the father trying to stay awake for the sake of the daughter. There. The spirit of Vatican II.